Om Vasudevaya Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudire Nashtaprai Shavadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttam Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki. So continuing with the discussion on on Sri Prabhupada Lilamrita by Srila Goswami. Today we are reading this part where Prabhupada went to Visakhapatnam in February 1972. So Visakhapatnam, February 17, 1972. A broad beach of white sparkling sands and the Bay of Bengal's warm, clear waters were special features of Srila Prabhupada's visit to Visakhapatnam. Puri Maharaj's small ashram where Srila Prabhupada stayed was only 5 minutes from the ocean. And every morning, Prabhupada and his entourage of about 15 devotees would take long walks along the seashore, Yamuna. I don't think Prabhupada ever excluded any one of us from going with him to the beach. All the devotees knew at which time Srila Prabhupada would be taking his walk, and we would come out from our different quarters and follow him to the seashore. The walks were brisk and refreshing and full of talk about Krishna. Somehow or other, we were all able to hear Srila Prabhupada speak. Gurudas. I always went on every morning walk, but one time I was sitting in the temple when I suddenly saw Prabhupada and the devotees going towards the beach. I immediately ran out of the temple to join them without even taking time to get my shoes. But there were barnacles and rocks leading down to the beach. When Srila Prabhupada saw me coming, lifting my feet up high, painfully hobbling down the rough road, he looked over and said, "Oh, your feet are hurting. Why aren't you wearing shoes?" And I said, "Prabhupada, when I'm with you, I don't feel any pain." Prabhupada stopped and said, "Then why don't you cut your throat?" Everyone laughed and I laughed also. He said, "There is enough tapasya. Why create your own?" See how practical Prabhupada was. Guru Kripa. Prabhupada would talk philosophy on and on. There were many things I couldn't understand. I would just listen anyway, although I couldn't remember anything. I would just hear and hear. But it hadn't registered yet. I used to walk behind him on the beach, and I figured that if I can't follow his teachings or example yet, at least let me step in his footsteps in the sand. Vishaka. Sometimes a dog would try to follow us or would bark at us. We were all surprised to see how Prabhupada would flick his cane and the dog would run away. Once, when we passed a cow on the road, Prabhupada gave her ample room to pass, and he told us a story of how he had been gored by a cow shortly after he had taken sannyas. So that happened in Delhi when he was doing book distribution. Oh, and the cow really attacked him. Tejas. Once on a morning walk, Prabhupada was speaking about the dog. He gave a reference to a shloka by Chanakya Pandit about the 5 good qualities of a dog that is very faithful and satisfied with anything. And soon Prabhupada said we should be Krishna's dog. He was also speaking about how our pujaris should never be paid. The teacher and the pujari should never receive a salary. They must work in pure devotion. Kshatriya also. He said that was a mistake in government today, that the Kshatriyas are being paid. He discussed so many things, one after another. So, of course, Prabhupada says this, but practically we have to see how many people can work voluntarily, free of cost, free of charge. Nandakumar, Srila Prabhupada would tell us to go bathe in the ocean, go to the beach, he would say. So one day I asked him, Srila Prabhupada, whenever I go down to the beach, the sun is warm on my body and the water feels so good. The sand, it seems like such a comfortable material situation. How should I understand your reason for asking us to go to the beach? I know the spiritual master never gives a disciple anything that will cause him to become materially attached, but always gives him whatever he needs to remember Krishna. But when I go to the beach, it seems I just enjoy my senses. How can I relate that to Krishna? How can I understand that this instruction is for my spiritual benefit? Prabhupada said, the sun is there. Krishna is the light of the sun. Ocean is there. Krishna is the taste of water. You're surrounded by Krishna. How can you forget Krishna? He's all around you. Panjanya. I was a new devotee and I asked Prabhupada, what about swimming? Srila Prabhupada, is that not Maya? Prabhupada said, Lord Chaitanya used to go swimming all the time. He used to play ball. So you can go and swim. Just make sure you remember Krishna. So that's the instruction. Puri Maharaj's ashram was a simple single-story building of about 8 rooms. When he offered Prabhupada a room next to his own, Prabhupada was pleased, accepting it as an expression of friendship. Prabhupada relaxed with his god brothers, Puri Maharaj and Anand Brahmachari, speaking with them in Bengali. Puri Maharaj said he appreciated Prabhupada's work and his Western disciples. Prabhupada's disciples had already seen formal exchanges of obeisances between Prabhupada and his god brothers, as when in Bombay they had seen Prabhupada get off his Vyasasana and offer dandavats to his god brothers. But in Visakhapatnam, they saw more intimate dealings. They saw for the first time Srila Prabhupada living comfortably, at ease, in the same quarters as his god brothers. And they didn't feel themselves being treated condescendingly or superficially, or being regarded as oddities. Through Prabhupada's guidance, they began to learn more of the essential friendly and humble exchanges between Vaishnavas. Prabhupada's god brother Ananda was eager to cook and serve not only Srila Prabhupada but all his disciples. Anand was elderly and yet he took the position of always offering menial service. Although he spoke very little English, Prabhupada's disciples could perceive the affection of Ananda and Srila Prabhupada for each other. Ananda's communication with Srila Prabhupada's disciples was particularly through his cooking and serving of prasada. So that language goes far beyond anything else. Each morning, everyone would gather on the veranda outside Prabhupada's quarters. The men sitting on one side, the ladies on the other. Down the center aisle, Anand would walk briskly, distributing prasadam, while Prabhupada sat at one end on a wooden chair, fingering his japa beads and observing the devotees take prasadam. Prabhupada had supplied money to the ashram, and Anand was regularly cooking sumptuous feasts, deep fried chunks of potatoes in powdered spices, rice, yogurt, dal, 3 different types of sabjis, French fries, chutney, malpura, rajkeli, sandesh, shira, and everything cooked to a nectarian standard of excellence. Wow, so much of prasadam. Prabhupada would sit at the head of the 2 rows of devotees and encourage them to take prasadam. Give him more, Prabhupada would praise Anand's cooking, smiling with pleasure to see his disciples accept prasadam. The devotees would finish, having them induced to eat as much as they possibly could. And Srila Prabhupada would say aloud the Prem Dhvani. Then all the devotees would shout in response, Jai. After one such feast, Prabhupada called the devotees into his room and remarked, see how he is cooking. He cooks everything, he serves it, and then he doesn't eat until everyone is fully satisfied. This is Vaishnava, how he should act. He is more satisfied to serve than to enjoy himself. The feast continued twice a day, and in the evening many guests arrived to take prasadam, chant in the kirtans, and hear Srila Prabhupada lecture. One day Srila Prabhupada took his disciples to see a famous temple of Lord Narasimha, Sri Simachalam, on top of a hill about 5 miles north of Visakhapatnam. Thousands of stone steps led up to the hill to the temple, which was situated in a natural amphitheater on the side of the hill. Prabhupada said the temple, which was now run by followers of the Ramanuja sect, was particularly important because Lord Chaitanya had visited there on his tour of South India. Yes, Himachalam, one of the great temples of Lord Narasimha there. Srila Prabhupada chose to approach the temple by car, riding up the winding road past orchards of mango, jackfruits, and cashew, and fields of pineapple. On arriving at the temple, Srila Prabhupada and his disciples met one of the temple Brahmins who showed them around the grounds. The temple buildings were of black granite, and carved into the rock were the forms and pastimes of Vishnu, especially in his incarnation of Lord Narasimha. As Prabhupada moved from place to place, building to building, he sometimes rode up steep stairs on a palanquin carried by 4 men. When Prabhupada came upon an immense banyan tree at the lower end of the temple grounds, he said that the tree must be thousands of years old. As he stood beneath the tree, his servant Nandakumar handed him a small champak flower. Extending his thumb and forefinger from the bead bag, Prabhupada held the champak flower and looked fondly at it. This flower, he said, is the color of Lord Chaitanya, and this flower is the most loved all over India. The flower is beautiful to look at and beautiful to smell. He carried the small saffron gold flower between his fingers throughout the rest of the morning. So yes, champak flower represents Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, because that was the color of body of Lord Chaitanya. When Prabhupada and his group entered the inner sanctum where the deity of Lord Narasimha resided, their guide explained that the murti dated back to the time of Prahlad Maharaj. An ancient king named Pururava and his consort Urvashi had once visited this hill, and at the request of Urvashi, the murti who appeared to her in a dream had been excavated. The Lord had ordained that he should be worshipped in this place, but that he would give darshan only one day a year, during the month of Vaishak. I don't remember exactly which day, if I'm not wrong. I think it is either Basant Panchami or one of those days. The rest of the year, he would be entirely covered with ground sandalwood pulp mixed with camphor and other scents. Therefore, the deity now appeared to be only a lump covered with a layer of sandalwood. Prabhupada commented that the sandalwood was to keep the deity cool-headed, because Narasimha, when he was very angry, to keep him cool, they cover every day, they just put sandalwood on top of the sandalwood, on top of sandalwood, mixed with camphor and other scents. So only one day they remove all this sandalwood and they let people take darshan. Madhvananda. When Prabhupada was at the Narasimha temple in Vishakhapatnam, it was the same as when he was in Vrindavan. When he got out of the car, he was very grave. We went into the temple and there was a chamber. Then we went down. The walls were 4 feet thick and it seemed like hundreds of feet of tunnels before we got into the inner sanctum. There was a deity with just a mound of sandalwood paste on him. As soon as we entered, Prabhupada said, begin chanting the Narasimha mantra. So we started chanting. Tavkara Kamalavare Nakam Adhuta Shringam. And we circumambulated the deity. Then we stood before the deity and Prabhupada offered obeisances. Guru Kripa. When we came into the deity room, Prabhupada had us sing the Narasimha prayers. He always manifested with such devotion. That is what separated him from us, not only his learning or his knowledge, but his devotion. In these places, we would see him become very silent, very grave, and when he would speak, such peace would fill us from within. When he would speak, you could feel it. He was constantly convincing us of Krishna consciousness. Not purposely, but he was just being himself. In these places, it would come out. When Prabhupada stood with us before the deity, we couldn't even see. It was just a mound of sandalwood. There was one Brahman with big earlobes, and he had a ring in his ear. We offered some money, but it was a very devotional time. Prabhupada didn't say much, and the main reason was that these places are appreciated according to one's spiritual advancement. The details and facts and the history are not really that important. There is nothing really to say. Prabhupada would just make sure we had the proper respect and didn't commit any offense. Prabhupada would lecture in the evening, speaking sometimes at schools and social clubs in Vishakhapatnam. During the program at the Ramakrishna Hall, where more than 1,000 people attended, Srila Prabhupada's dancing induced the entire audience to dance. The devotees danced in a ring around Srila Prabhupada and the kirtan continued for an hour. At another program, a bearded American anthropologist rode up on a motorcycle to attend Prabhupada's lecture and kirtan. Afterwards, the anthropologist told Srila Prabhupada that he had come to India to study the primitive tribes. Prabhupada told him it was simply a waste of time. Why do you want to study the primitive people, he asked. Why don't you study the exalted people? And Prabhupada narrated a story. One time, a poor man roasted a cob of corn and then began picking off the kernels one at a time and eating them. In this way, it took him many hours to finish. He did this, Prabhupada said, because he had nothing else to do, just to pass the time of the day. In the same way, the study of anthropology was simply a waste of time for that. Why don't you study some person, a group of persons from whom you can learn something? Which is true. What is the point in studying primitive tribes? But except theoretical or scholarly understanding, what other benefit he would get? During the day, Prabhupada would sit outside his room and enjoy the atmosphere. He wore no shirt and his healthy body shone with a golden luster as he sat drinking freshly pressed sugarcane juice. This is just how it is in Vaikuntha, he said. There is always very cool, pleasant breeze. He often walked about chanting, talking about Krishna, listened to the devotees' kirtans, and observing the activities of the temple. Repeatedly, Prabhupada invited Puri Maharaj to come and preach in the West. He requested him to at least come to Mayapur for ISKCON's international gathering of devotees. Prabhupada felt that Puri Maharaj, on seeing all the Western disciples, might feel moved to join him and preach. Puri Maharaj agreed to accompany Prabhupada to Calcutta and Mayapur. And the pleasant week in Vishakhapatnam came to an end with Prabhupada, his disciples, and Puri Maharaj looking forward to traveling together to Calcutta. Guru Kripa. Although we arrived at the train station early, the train was already at the platform. It was very hot, and 5 or 6 of us were having kirtan. Then Shamsundar climbed up a coconut tree and got this fantastic coconut. He opened it and gave it to Prabhupada, who proceeded to drink a lot. Then Prabhupada gave it to Shamsundar, and Shamsundar drank. And Prabhupada said, give it to the Kirtan members. Each man in the Kirtan group was so thirsty that he wasn't even thinking of leaving any for the next man, but would just pass this coconut around. And the thing wouldn't empty. I tilted it up and the coconut water was coming out, pouring on my shirt, and I was drinking, and still it wouldn't empty. We were amazed. Prabhupada was smiling and we were chanting. We all became cool and satisfied. Wow. Looked like Akshay coconut. Shamsundar. Prabhupada and I were in a first-class railway coach, a private compartment for 2 persons, clacking through the warm Indian night, somewhere between Vishakhapatnam and Calcutta. Prabhupada was talking and joking and playing tapes until around 10:30 p.m. when he lay down to take rest. For a while, I switched off the lights. At about midnight, Prabhupada sat upright and called my name. Shamsundar, take dictation, he said. Then followed a train of thoughts so lucid and coherent that I could only conclude that while we think Srila Prabhupada is sleeping, he is usually not sleeping, but is thinking, reflecting on ways to serve Krishna more and more. So thus ends chapter 38. So we still have time, we can start chapter 39. I'll build a wonderful temple for you. Prabhupada had postponed the Mayapur cornerstone laying ceremony until Gaur Purnima, the appearance day of Lord Chaitanya, February 29, 1972. He had requested a big festival with the pandal and free feasting for guests. His disciples from all over the world would attend. I want very much to hold this function this year with all of my students. It's a very important day and it will be a great service to Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur and to his son Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. So please arrange for this program. In December, when the war had broken out between India and Pakistan over Bangladesh near Mayapur, the Indian government had forbidden foreigners to stay in the northern area of West Bengal. The devotees had vacated, returning a few weeks later when the war had ended. They had continued arranging for the festival, and a few days before Gaur Purnima, Prabhupada arrived to stay with them. When Prabhupada saw a banner on bamboo poles, welcome Srila Prabhupada, he remarked, I don't know if my God brothers would like this. He had only heard that some of the God brothers objected to his taking the same title as a spiritual master, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada. He had not actually taken the name, but his disciples had given him the name a few years ago in America. In May 1968, while in Boston, Prabhupada had been dictating a letter and had mentioned to his secretary that Swamiji was a third-class title for the spiritual master. Then why do we call you Swamiji? His secretary had asked. Spiritual master Prabhupada had replied, is usually addressed by names like Gurudev, Vishnupad, or Prabhupada. May we call you Prabhupada? The secretariat asked. Prabhupada replied, yes. And his disciples had switched from Swamiji to Prabhupada. One of the devotees had inquired further from Prabhupada about the meaning of the word and had published a statement in Back to Godhead magazine. Prabhupada. The word Prabhupada is a term of the utmost reverence in Vedic religious circles, and it signifies a great saint even among saints. The word actually has two meanings. First, one at whose feet, paths, there are many Prabhus, a term meaning master, which the disciples of a guru use in addressing each other. The second meaning is one who is always found at the lotus feet of Krishna, the Supreme Master. So Prabhupada has two meanings. So one at whose feet are there are many Prabhus, many devotees. And second is one who has found the lotus feet of Krishna, always found at the lotus feet of Krishna, taken shelter at the lotus feet of Krishna. In the line of disciplic succession through which Krishna consciousness is conveyed to mankind, there have been a number of figures of such spiritual importance as to be called Prabhupada. Srila Rupa Goswami Prabhupada executed the will of his master Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and therefore he and his associate Goswamis are called Prabhupada. Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Thakur executed the will of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and therefore he is also addressed as Prabhupada. Our spiritual master, Om Vishnu Pada, 108, Sri Srimad Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj, has in the same way, executed the will of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Prabhupada in carrying the message of love of Krishna to the Western world. And therefore, we American and European humble servants of His divine grace from all the different centers of the Sankirtan movement have followed in the footsteps of Srila Rupa Goswami Prabhupada and prefer to address His grace, our spiritual master, as Prabhupada. And he has kindly said yes. So now, Srila Prabhupada is the one that is more famous as Prabhupada. Everyone concerned had been happy about the title Prabhupada, and no one had foreseen the envy the name would uncover. How could Prabhupada compete for the honor due to his own spiritual master? He was fixed as a humble servant of his spiritual master. The members of ISKCON saw no harm in calling the spiritual master Prabhupada, and there could be no stopping them. He was their Prabhupada. They had even printed A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada on the invitations for the Gaur Purnima festival. Prabhupada knew it would raise the eyebrows of certain of his more critical God brothers. Well, that also happens. When inspecting the living accommodations for the devotees, Prabhupada found spacious white canvas tents, one for the men and one for the women, with fluorescent lighting inside. A large pandal tent stood in the center of the other tents, and a small tent in the rear served as a kitchen. Immediately surrounding the small compounds were rice fields. The ground, therefore, was slightly moist, and the wet fields bred large mosquitoes, which emerged at sunset. Conditions were primitive, but many of these devotees were the same disciples who had traveled with Prabhupada for a year and a half in India, and sometimes living in dirty dhamshalas with bare rooms, and sometimes living in cold tents in Allahabad. The devotees had not come to Mayapur to be comfortable, but to serve Prabhupada. In future years, by the result of their efforts, many devotees would be able to gather comfortably in Mayapur for the spacious buildings Prabhupada was planning. So yes, any construction or any creation takes time, sacrifice, austerities. So somebody has done it. Well aware that Westerners were unaccustomed to the austerities of living in India, Prabhupada wanted to provide facilities so his disciples could feel comfortable and be able to focus their stay in India on spiritual life without distracting inconveniences. He was pushing them to help in various ways to establish a Mayapur building with running water, electricity, and other conveniences. So now Prabhupada is in Mayapur and preparing to do the inauguration for Mayapur Chandrodaya Mandir. So we'll stop there. See anybody has any questions or comments? Okay, you have a safe and wonderful day. Hare Krishna. Jai Srila Prabhupada.
Thank you.